Right, hello guys, fairly casual video today. So if you hadn't guessed already, I am working on a fairly sizable new lore video. It's pretty getting close to the end. It was meant to be a short video that I was going to have finished at the start of this week, and it kind of got out of control when I was scripting it. So yeah, you'll be surprised at what it is perhaps, and I think you'll like it. But if I tell you it'll be out Saturday, it's going to be Monday, so it'll be finished when it's finished. Anyway. Sometimes current issues jump up that get in the way, and I wanted to take a moment to talk about the issues that are happening right now. So for those of you who haven't seen, Games Workshop have chosen right now this week to do a price increase for their miniatures. I say this week, I mean they've announced it's happening this week. Now as much as I think that this is actually not that interesting, I thought I'd make this to avoid answering tons of people in the comments below before my next video comes out. Not to mention that I'm sure I will have to also turn out a video similar to this tomorrow, because tomorrow is Games Workshop's big reveal, and it had better be a big reveal for how much they've been building this up, and if it turns out to be just X Primarch returns, I'm going to be very severely disappointed, because please, you know, you can do better than that. On the other hand, if it is something about a genuine change in, say, the Emperor, well, now you've got my attention. The short version of today's video is capitalism, baby. Now, I'll just start off by saying, whenever any company raises its prices, that's rarely going to receive a round of applause from customers. I can rarely think of a situation where people will be lining up to declare, "Good job, because we've had it way too easy until now." No, of course there's going to be that additional layer that comes with Games Workshop, that is the people that are always thinking that it costs too much. They thought this before, and they will definitely be thinking it now, and also in the future. But before we go any further, what are the price increases? Well, Games Workshop haven't listed them officially, but of course, they've been leaked. And although, you know, take it what it is, I'm not just going to go through them, because if you want to go and find it, you can find it. It all boils down to, most of the increases are about £2.50 to £5, work it out in dollars or whatever. Like I said the other day, exchange rates are fucked, so look it up. Occasionally the odd model, like a Land Raider Crusader, is going to be like something like a £10 increase. So from what I could see, I got the feeling that the price increases that were the highest were being placed on models that are probably not so readily sold these days. So my impression was that they're probably going to be producing less of those models, and therefore, as anybody who buys stuff in bulk should know, doing smaller runs on things is generally going to cost you more. This is why if you were to buy, say, 10 business cards per card, you're going to be paying a lot more than you would if you, say, bought 500 cards. But honestly, the ins and outs of how much it costs per model, how much resin is physically in a model, is really by the by, and I will explain why I think that. I know some people like to get into all that detail, like, you know, how long can a mold last, what's the electricity production, how many fractions of a penny should every miniature be. Look, I've wanted to get into that at some point in a video, drill down on it. But, you know, you're never going to know for real what those details are going to be. You know, it's going to be very difficult to know that. You know, of course, you can go and speak to people in the industry and but I mean, in relation to specifically for Games Workshop, it's going to be very difficult to really get down to that core. You can make guesstimates, of course. But anyway, as interesting as that is, I personally find it to be quite irrelevant. And again, I'll explain why. Because that's not really the concept of how producing products for sale works, because it's much more about the concept of subjective value. Now, as a company, your core goal is to simply make as much money as possible. That's it. That's the emotionless reason for having a company, but it's not the be-all and the end-all. In essence, you're going to be making a thing, you want to sell that thing for the highest possible markup that you can get away with without people being pissed off and not wanting to buy it. So this is why I found a good example from a friend years ago, that, for example, lawnmowers that you buy from a hardware place, whatever, they're often marked up anything like 400% from the base cost, okay, 400%. And you could probably apply that to almost anything. It's not unusual in the realm of consumer products that if you had an open access look at all the things that were sold to consumers, I am certain that the markup on some of those products would be mind-blowing, and people would probably just never buy those things again. However, we all should know that nothing is just as cutthroat and simple as that concept of things. It's like when people use the lazy analogy for video games, usually in a defending video game publishers and so on and so on. It's like, oh, they're just here to make the money, guys. They're just here to make the money. You know, they don't care about the community. And it's like, right, except they do have to care a bit, because otherwise everyone would just hate them and then never buy their product. On the other hand, as we've seen in the world of video games, those two things rarely seem to happen, because no matter how much people resent a game being shipped in a very broken state, or a new console costing bonkers amounts of money, they'll still buy it every single time. I mean, it has to be a full-on car crash before people will walk away from it. And when it comes to this increase, I'm sure that it is basically an adjusted rate. I have no rationale as to why that is beyond, like I say, maybe some of the stuff is just sold less, others were just due an update. The very obvious thing is why now? I mean, just the optics of it. You know, you couldn't have picked any worse time than now to do it. And that's one thing that I genuinely can't understand. I suppose I could theorize, and you know, it's really only just my random opinion, that perhaps maybe this was something that was in the works for a long time already, and then, you know, Games Workshop productions were delayed. They meant to do this earlier. Now things are back up and running. They thought, okay, we'll just get this out of the way because they've got this big announcement. You know, they know as well people are going to be buying more models, and it's a way to mitigate losses and da-da-da-da-da. I don't know. Although that kind of goes against my sense of, you know, certain models selling less, you know, but anyway. I'm sure people have any number of opinions on this and the whys and the wheres. So where we come to on this is me reminding people, and you know, sometimes unpopularly, I know this will be a shock, that Warhammer is an extracurricular activity. It is not something you need to do to live and survive. Now, I know that eBay is obviously not Games Workshop, and it's not comparable to, you know, kind of regular consumer sales, but it is a perfect sphere of something that I mention often, and that is the concept of the subjective theory of value. Now, I will note that I think this applies best to leisure products, not your basic staples, food and resources for, say, like building a house. However, it does still apply there, obviously. It's just that when you get into buying products that you would like, but also could easily do without, this is where subjective value really becomes much more applicable. So the subjective theory of value, what is that? Well, it says in essence that all trades between individuals are voluntary, and that both the producer and the consumer subjectively perceive the goods, labour and exchange money as being of higher value to the goods, the labour or money that they give away. What this is basically saying is that the owner of the product and you, the buyer, both understand that there is value in the product being sold that is above whatever it cost to make. It also considers the concept that by transferring ownership of X thing to a customer who values it more highly without necessarily modifying that thing, it's also said that an individual is then going to tend to obtain diminishing levels of satisfaction from the acquisition of additional units of a good. So people will initially prioritize obtaining the goods that they need most, for like food, shelter, etc, etc. But once this has met a sufficient level for that person, their desire for other goods will start to assume more and more relative importance. So of course there's other factors there like peer pressure, advertising, marketing, all sorts of things like this. But what it comes down to is that individuals will seek to bring that level of satisfaction of their need for food to the same level of satisfaction of their need for other goods. It basically boils down to the typical kind of free market stuff, competition between individuals, trading of goods or providing services so that those people can then trade their relative wealth for goods they perceive as being higher value to them. Now, just while I'm talking all this spiel, I'll also mention something known as the paradox of value. This is actually something you see often in the comments when anybody is discussing Games Workshop miniatures, because they're thinking about, okay, how much did it literally cost in terms of labour and so on to make? Because it's related to the labour theory of value. But it's not simply about labour, but in considering around the idea that the real price of everything is the toil and the trouble of acquiring that thing. So it's not just about the work involved, but also about how difficult it is to acquire. So what this is really discussing is the idea of the value of something attributed to use or for exchange, which I think you could reasonably also consider exchange as being a luxury commodity, something you purchase for, say, a hobby. It has little real use beyond the value you place upon doing that thing and then what you may consider to later exchange it for. This is why if you suddenly found yourself with, say, less disposable income, you generally don't go on and then continue buying luxury items or things which don't have a practical use for you in terms of survival, like utilities. So the theory considers that because we can observe how water is considerably more useful in terms of your literal survival, whereas something like diamonds generally still command a higher price than water in the market. So overall, it's this sense that the things which have the greatest value often have little or no value in exchange, comparative with those which have the greatest value generally having little or no value in practical use. Now, for those who want to be pedantic, obviously we know there's practical uses for diamond, but still, overall, you're not going to die in 3 days from not having a diamond. That's the point. So it's obvious to us that in terms of survival, nothing is more important for us than water. Yet in terms of its value, little can be had in exchange for it. generally speaking. Whereas a diamond has scarcely any practical use value in the scheme of things beyond being shiny, but a great quantity of other goods may frequently be exchanged for it. So the conclusion is that it's not the practical use of something that determines price or value, but the relative and timely usefulness of a single unit of X thing. Essentially, it is also about scarcity. This is why, dependent on where you are in the world, the value of water will be relative to its scarcity. If you were stuck in a desert, the value of water suddenly becomes priceless, and that of a diamond basically worthless. However, generally, since water is in such large supply, and let's not go off on a topic about that, the general value of water is low. Basically, each additional unit of water can be applied to less urgent uses as more urgent uses for water are satisfied. So this might seem wildly irrelevant, but it's very fundamental to our understanding of subjective value. This is why in the recent situation we have seen ourselves in, people suddenly start buying up goods and the prices of things which were not high before suddenly rise in value because they're much scarcer, and so your value in terms of what you place on that thing gets higher. It's all very straightforward stuff, to be honest. Subjective theory of value seeks to answer this by, at its simplest, saying individuals understand that it's not just about thinking of goods in like an abstract way, but understanding that it's much more about making a choice relative to what quantity of goods will relatively satisfy an individual's subjectively ranked preferences. So basically what it's saying is you'll decide how best to spend your own money based on your understanding of rarity and value. And again, the concept of rarity and value is again also subjective to you as a person, because some people are going to care about, like, I don't know, blue elephants more than another person's going to care about red fish. You're very subjective, and it's like a big sliding scale. So companies have to kind of walk that line and understand, okay, what's important to people? How are we going to change stuff? If we change this this model, is that going to really piss people off? Or is it just going to make them feel like, meh, you know, that's annoying, but I can deal with it? You know, what it boils down to is that Warhammer, like I said, is a leisure activity. It's not something you need to do to survive or exist. And as I've asked people before about, you know, their different hobbies, we know that there are many, many more that cost extraordinary amounts more than Warhammer does. For example, to get started in 40k, now technically, if you just wanted a few models to paint and enjoy, you know, you can do that for anything like £20 to £50, probably less. But if you wanted to start up a force to actually play with, I guess you could do that for a few £100. Probably, okay, I've kind of looked at it before, in that region. Now immediately some people are going to scream, oh my god, that's an outrageous price. Yeah, okay, sure. But other people are going to think, you know, compared to my airsoft or aquarium keeping hobby, or name it hobby, that's pretty reasonable. And I asked about this in my community tab a while back, and I said, you know, what other hobbies do you guys do? What do they cost? If you're happy to disclose it, please break down what you would spend to kind of, you know, start that hobby up. And to the surprise of no one, the answers from you guys about the hobbies that you do beyond Warhammer, the replies were extensive. We're talking hundreds of people replying. I mean, let's for example take, say, my Space Marine army that you guys have seen is pretty sizable at this point. But, you know, I didn't just go out and buy all that on day one, you know, so that I could get straight into playing games. I bought 90% of that army over many years when I was a kid, 5, 6, 7 years, and I was just spending £5 here, £10 there, birthdays, Christmases. It took me a long time to build that stuff up. With me also, when I was a kid, I was doing small jobs to earn a little bit of money so I could buy one new model. I'm sure that story echoes with a lot of people. The thing is, at this point, the hard truth is that Games Workshop is basically the dominating force in the miniatures industry, by a wide margin. I mean, there really is nothing comparable to it, and there hasn't been for years, decades. It is an astonishingly valuable company at this point. And like I say, the truth is that you don't end up with a company in that position by keeping your prices rock bottom. Also, and again, you know, that's hard to hear, but it is the truth. You know, whenever you corner a market, there tends to be that approach of, you know, well, where else are you going to go? Which is fairly true for Games Workshop products. I mean, what else are you going to do, especially if you're already invested? That's another thing. Once you get invested in a thing, you're kind of caught within that. And it's not like a trap that's laid out, it's just the nature of it. It's why, for example, there was this argument with Star Citizen. You know, when Star Citizen came along and people were spending out like hundreds of pounds on ships for the game which wasn't even really there yet. And, you know, people were very defensive about it, but some people were putting forward the argument. And they were saying, well, look, you know, on the one hand, those guys are probably being defensive about it because they love that thing. On the other hand, maybe they're being defensive about it because they spent tons of money and they're kind of trapped within that thing now. So, you know, that's another sphere to consider. So final thoughts, was this an odd time to choose to announce price rises? Yeah, certainly. Would there ever be a time to announce price rises that would not lead to people foaming at the mouth? Well, I can't really think of a situation where that wouldn't happen. Does Games Workshop as a company have to walk a fine line between upsetting customers with price rises and maintaining market domination with a company that is extremely profitable? Yep, they do. If the head of Games Workshop wasn't doing that, they wouldn't be doing their job. Now, I'm sure many people want me to be really outraged by these price rises and be all like, "Brr, those pesky executives." Look, I hear you, price rises are annoying. However, at the same time, I'm just fairly accepting of how things are. You know, as a person, I have changed in the last 10 years. I am pretty apathetic to a lot of stuff these days. I used to get very riled up about these things back in the times when I covered like video games. But here's the thing, you know, after literally about a decade of me being pissed off and ranting about this and that and it's not happening and why haven't they done this, you realize, okay, you're just kind of screaming into the wind, and the only person who's really getting upset or bothered about it is you. And those guys running the show, they're still going to make those choices. You know, things are going to happen when they happen. This is why you get retcon stuff. You know, there's a lot of stuff that gets, you know, retconned. I know you guys, I hate that word, but there's a lot of stuff like that which gets changed and people don't like it. But somebody somewhere makes a choice and that stuff happens. And you have a hard time to stop that thing happening because it just will. Now listen, is it to say that changes that occur cannot be changed because of audience or consumer backlash? Because, I mean, we all remember the debacle about the Star Wars EA game, or, you know, I can think loads of examples, like, you remember when Gap changed their logo? I mean, that Gap changed their logo years ago. They tried to change their logo, and the backlash against it was mad, and it was a very rare thing. I mean, Gap, when you think about a big company like Gap, they announced they changed their logo, they put it out there and said, this is where we are, this is what we changed the logo to. Now, just to get to that point, they probably already had loads of plans in place globally, and they must have shelled out millions to that point. But then suddenly they saw that consumers hated it, and they went back and said, okay, we're going to go back to our logo. I was mind blown by that because, you know, for a big company to change and go backtrack like that is bonkers. You know, the amount of money they must have lost as a result, but they obviously weighed up again that subjective value of, do we keep a logo which everybody hates or not? Of course, it's obviously variable depending on your different company. But to come back, like I said, to the debacle around the Star Wars EA game. Now, if you recall, they tried to put paid modifying microtransactions into the game, and they did it and hope nobody noticed, even though from the very beginning it was extremely obvious that this had a big effect. And they did all the marketing spiel, and the pro EA game changers were out in force to defend it. However, suddenly we started to see that people were cancelling their pre-orders, they were cancelling wanting to get into the game, and this started to be noticed. And EA the funny thing with this one was that EA initially were like, well, you know, we're sort of listing blah 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 blah, you know, very generic statement. However, a couple of days later, they suddenly came out and said, right, okay, we're going to change things. Basically what happened there was Disney stepped in and said, hey, EA, what the fuck are you doing? You're making people hate our Star Wars product, EA. Fix that shit. Fix it right now. To the astonishment of literally everybody, they actually did. It was a really rare example of EA actually doing a big U-turn, an embarrassing U-turn, because they basically had to admit, yeah, we put all this game-breaking shit into our game and we tried to charge people money for it. Sorry about that. You know, they basically had doubled down on it that week and then they had to change it. This is not as randomly off topic as it might seem, because the point that I'm making is that big companies, they don't care about the bluster. This is the point. These big companies, they just don't care about people making posts on Reddit and Facebook and YouTube. Because if you didn't notice, right, it's 2020. Bluster and outrage are everywhere. They permeate almost everything we do, he says, reading the comments. But seriously, it's like we have said for literally decades now, and as was proven with that EA Star Wars debacle, the company never listens. In that instance, the company that never listens, EA, listened because it became about money, not because people were freaking out on social media. This was the point. People were freaking out for weeks about this on YouTube and all sorts of other stuff. They were freaking out and going mad about their sort of microtransaction shit. But it was just typical, it was just normal. Happens every single time. But the difference with the Star Wars thing was suddenly people were like en masse in comments saying, I've cancelled my pre-order, I've cancelled my pre-order. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, they suddenly started to care. You know, join the dots, 2 and 2. Okay? And this is the important thing to understand. Yes, it is not as exciting as being angry about everything all the time, but it's just the reality. The vast majority of consumers don't bother to leave a product review or a YouTube comment or a Reddit post or a Facebook whatever, okay? Most people are just buying shit that they want to or not. So a company in 2020 is going to understand that almost any decision is going to lead to people being angry. I mean, just, you know, look at some of the hysteria that has occurred with other choices Games Workshop have made. But funnily enough, you know, give it 2-3 weeks later, people don't care. So they're no strangers to that. The one thing that I am sure of is that price increases do not appear because somebody just woke up one day and said, you know what, let's bang 10% on that X number of products today. They're going to have spent time figuring these things out, which ones they want to increase, by how much is acceptable and tolerable, and so on and so on. So look, in relation to the price rises, my prediction, yeah, you're going to see some grumbling. They apparently also have a big announcement, like I said, coming tomorrow, and if it's as big as has been hyped, it's probably going to eclipse the hell out of these price increases, and then people are going to be talking about them a lot less, you know, especially they're going to be talking a lot less about paying £2.50 for extra for some Marines. These things are going to happen from time to time. I think I've explained my position fairly well. You know, I welcome your discussive opinions. As always, I do try to reply to people in the comments, but, you know, try to keep them constructive. You guys always do a good job of posting well thought out opinions, and I try to encourage us to be able to discuss stuff always in a sensible way. None of us are perfect, but believe it or not, we are able to exist together. People are able to have different opinions. That does seem something that's become ever increasingly a lost concept, or to the detriment of all. But, you know, thanks for watching as always, guys. Hope you enjoy. Like I said, I just wanted to get onto this one, get it out there, put some thoughts so that, you know, I've kind of answered this now. Like I say, I'll look into the comments today. I always am hanging around the comments for the first few hours when I post a video, and this seems a sensible opportunity to mention the fact that if you buy from a company like Element Games are an official reseller, and you're going to be saving anything at least like 10% in terms of what you would pay from Games Workshop. And, you know, this is a legit thing. They're an official reseller from Games Workshop. That's how it works, and if you want to pick that up, just make sure, of course, you're in the EU, because they don't ship out to the US. If you use my link, which is down below, okay, that will help me out, because every purchase you make, a little bit of that is going to go to me, so it helps support the channel. Okay, you're going to get a little bit of reduction on the price there. Just also, if you happen to live in the north of the UK, it's worth going along to Element. It's a really great store. I've been there myself. I went there when I did my painting course with Siege Studios, which, by the way, I'm sure that the Siege Studios courses will come back at some point. I've had people ask about that, and I think they've got various things in the works, so that stuff there as well. But yeah, that's just my little mention there, guys. Make sure to check out Element Games, check it out below. That's going to be some way you can save yourself a little bit of money, which is always a good thing. And like I said, I've got a big lore video coming up. I probably will have another video out tomorrow, because this big announcement, or by all accounts it's big, so we'll see what happens tomorrow. I guess also, you know, drop your thoughts about what that could be down below. Let's see who's right tomorrow. All right, thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one.